My son thought he was the smartest man in the room. He always did. Even as a boy, Marcus would walk into a space like he already owned it. Head up, shoulders back, that easy smile that made people trust him before he'd said a word. I raised him that way. I taught him confidence. I taught him to stand tall. And for 63 years, I told myself I'd done a good job. Then Vivian walked into his life, and I started to wonder if I'd taught him the wrong lessons. I want to be fair. When my son first brought her home, I tried. Lord knows I tried. She was beautiful in that careful, deliberate way. The kind of beautiful that takes an hour in the bathroom and never lets you forget it. She laughed at all my jokes. She called me sir, and then after the third visit started calling me dad, with this soft little smile like she was asking permission. My wife Eleanor, God rest her soul, would have seen through Vivian in about 45 seconds. Eleanor had a gift for people. She always said the eyes tell you everything the mouth is trying to hide. Eleanor passed 4 years ago. Cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end, Marcus held my hand at the funeral and told me we'd get through it together. And we did. We got through it together. Just the two of us, rattling around in this big house on Sycamore Drive, until Vivian appeared. I told myself I was being protective. I told myself any father would feel this way about the woman replacing his son's mother in the family. I gave her chances, birthday dinners, Christmas mornings, a whole Thanksgiving where I bit my tongue every single time she steered the conversation back to herself. I told myself I was imagining things. Then came the night of October 12th. Marcus had a work trip, 3 days in Atlanta for a conference. He kissed Vivian goodbye in the driveway while I watched from the porch, coffee in hand. They'd been married 11 months. The wedding had been beautiful. I'd paid for most of it. I'd smiled in every photograph. I wasn't spying. I want to make that clear. But come by the house that evening because Marcus had asked me to check on the furnace. It had been making a sound he didn't like, and he didn't want Vivian to deal with it alone. I had a key. I always had a key. Marcus insisted, so I let myself in through the side door into the utility room, the way I always did, quiet, so I wouldn't startle her. I heard her voice before I reached the kitchen. She was on the phone. Her back was to me. She was standing at the kitchen island in her silk robe, a glass of wine half empty beside her, laughing in a way I had never once heard her laugh around Marcus or me. It was loose and real, and a little mean, the laugh of someone who has taken off a costume. "No, listen to me," she was saying. "It's going to be fine. The old man is 63, he's got high blood pressure, and he still eats red meat 4 times a week. I give it 5 years, maybe less." She laughed again. "And when he goes, everything transfers to Marcus, and Marcus—" She paused, lowering her voice, but not enough. "Marcus does whatever I tell him to. You know that." I stood absolutely still in the utility room doorway. "The house alone is worth 1.4, she continued. "And that's before the accounts, before the business. I've seen the documents, baby. I've been very careful about what I've seen." Another pause. No, he doesn't suspect anything. He thinks I love him." She said it the way you describe a child believing in Santa Claus. Fond, almost. Pitying. "He's sweet. He's just not very smart." She was talking about my son. My son who graduated top of his class. My son who built his own logistics company from nothing at 28. My son who sat with his mother every single day of those 14 months and read to her when the medication made her too tired to hold a book. Not very smart. I backed out of that utility room the same way I came in. slow, quiet. I sat in my truck in the dark for a long time before I started the engine. I want to tell you I cried. Maybe I should have. But what I felt sitting in that dark driveway was something colder and much more deliberate than tears. It was the feeling I used to get back in my army days, in the seconds before a decision locked into place. Everything going very still, very clear. I had a choice to make, and I had to make it right. The obvious thing, the thing every nerve in my body wanted to do, was to call Marcus immediately, drive to Atlanta, knock on his hotel room door, sit him down, and tell him everything I'd heard. And I almost did. My thumb was on his name in my phone for a solid minute. But then I thought about Marcus, about how he looks at her, about the way his whole face changes when she walks into a room, like a light coming on, about the 11 months of marriage and the life they'd built together in that house and the trip they'd already booked for their first anniversary in February. I thought about what it would mean to hand him this grenade over the phone, 3 states away, alone in a hotel room, and I thought about Vivian. If I called Marcus and Marcus confronted her, what did I have? My word against hers. I hadn't recorded anything. I hadn't seen anything. I was a 63-year-old father-in-law she could easily paint as jealous, as overprotective, as a lonely widower who couldn't accept his son moving on. She was smart. I understood that now better than I ever had. She would spin it. She would cry. She would make Marcus choose. And Marcus loved her, and I didn't know yet which way he would fall. I needed more than my word. I drove home. I did not sleep. By 4 in the morning, I had a plan. I will not pretend it was easy. What came next? The hardest thing I have ever done in my life. Harder than burying Eleanor, and I did not think anything would ever be harder than that, was looking at my son's face over video call the next morning and smiling, asking him how Atlanta was, listening to him describe a dinner with his colleagues, laughing at something he said, acting like the world was exactly the shape he thought it was. I asked him, casually, if he and Vivian had any plans when he got back. He said she'd mentioned a dinner with some friends on Saturday. I said that sounded nice. Then I called my attorney, a man named Harold Greer, who has been my family's lawyer for 22 years. I told him I needed to understand something very specific about the way my estate was structured and what would happen if certain things changed. Harold is not a man who asks unnecessary questions. He answered what I asked. By the end of that call, I understood the landscape exactly. And then I waited. I am not naturally a patient man. Eleanor used to tease me about it, said I was the only person she knew who got frustrated waiting for a traffic light to change. But I have learned in 63 years that the right moment is always worth waiting for. Rush the wrong moment, and you ruin everything. You get one chance to cut clean, and if you miss, you hand the other person all the power. I waited 4 days. On the 5th day, Marcus came home from Atlanta, and the 3 of us had dinner at the house on Sycamore Drive. I sat across from Vivian and I watched her the way I should have been watching her from the beginning. Every gesture, every careful laugh, the way she touched Marcus's hand on the table, always when she wanted something, I noticed now, always preceding a request she wrapped in sweetness, the way her eyes slid to me sometimes with something behind them that wasn't warmth. She was performing. She had always been performing. I just hadn't had the key before. After dinner, while Marcus was in the kitchen doing dishes, he always did the dishes. He'd done them since he was 12 years old, one of the things I was proudest of. Vivian sat across from me in the living room and asked me how I was doing. Told me I seemed tired, said she worried about me living alone in that big house. I told her I was fine. I told her I appreciated her concern. I looked her in the eyes, and I smiled, and I meant none of it, and she knew none of that. That night, after I drove home, I set up the small digital recorder I'd bought 2 days earlier. It was the size of a pen. I'd practiced with it until I could operate it by feel, without looking. A week later, I invited them both to the house for Sunday dinner. I made Eleanor's pot roast, Marcus's favorite since childhood, and I opened a good bottle of wine. And after we'd eaten, I told them I had something I needed to discuss. I'd been thinking, I said, about the estate, about making sure everything was clear and documented while I was still here and healthy to do it. I said I wanted to walk through some of it with them together, so there were no surprises later. Vivian's attention sharpened. I felt it across the table like a change in air pressure. I talked for a while about the house, about the business accounts, about what I was thinking in terms of structure. I watched her watching me. I kept the recorder in my shirt pocket, running. And then, carefully, I said something I had prepared. I told them I'd been thinking about setting up a family trust, that I'd spoken to Harold, and that the structure I was considering would put the assets into trust with Marcus as primary trustee, but that in the event of a divorce, the trust would protect the estate from any claim by a spouse. I said I wanted to be clear about that, not accusatory, just clear. I looked at Vivian when I said it, and I held her gaze, and I said I just wanted to make sure everyone understood how things would be structured. I watched her expression move through several things very quickly. Surprise, recalculation. And then, because she was smart and she couldn't help herself, something else. That seems a little... I don't know. I guess I don't understand why you'd plan for a divorce, she said. Light tone. Small laugh. Marcus and I aren't going anywhere. Of course not, I said. It's just a legal structure. Standard practice. It's just interesting that you'd think about that. The lightness was thinning. I mean, I would hope after almost a year you'd trust that I'm here because I love your son. I do trust that, I said. And then I let the silence sit for just a moment too long. Marcus looked between us with the expression he'd had since he was a child, when he sensed tension he didn't understand. He started to say something, but Vivian spoke first. Her voice had changed, not dramatically, but enough. You know, she said, I felt for a while that you don't really accept me. That no matter what I do, I'm not going to be enough for you, because I'm not Eleanor. It was a good move. If I hadn't known what I knew, it might have even worked. Marcus's face flooded with discomfort. He started to speak. Vivian, I said quietly, I heard you on the phone. The room went very still. October 12th, I said. I came by the house to check the furnace. I heard you tell someone that Marcus isn't very smart, that you've seen the financial documents, that you're waiting. She didn't move for a long moment. Then she started to speak, her voice taking on a tone I can only describe as the sound of a story being constructed in real time. I don't know what you think you heard, but I have it recorded, I said. Not from that night. I didn't have a recorder then, but from tonight. I reached into my shirt pocket and set the recorder on the table between us. You said you don't understand why I'd plan for a divorce. You said it's interesting that I'd think about that. You said you hope I'd trust that you're here because you love my son. I looked at her steadily. Those words, on top of what I heard on October 12th, and I think a lawyer would find the pattern very clear. Marcus had gone completely white. Vivian looked at the recorder. She looked at me. And I watched the performance finally, completely end. What was underneath it was not tears and not remorse. It was calculation even now. She was working out the odds. Marcus, she said, turning to him. Don't, he said. Just that one word, and the way he said it, told me everything I needed to know about my son. He had heard it in her voice, too, the shift, the end of the costume. He was not a boy who'd been fooled. He was a man whose love had made him want to believe. There is a difference, and it matters, and I have never been more proud of him than I was in that moment. She left that night. She did not make a scene. I think she knew by then that scenes would not help her. The divorce was filed 3 weeks later. Harold handled it. The trust was in place by then, properly structured. She contested 1 or 2 small things and then stopped. I think she'd run the numbers and understood the math. Marcus didn't talk much in the weeks right after. He came to dinner most Sundays. He did the dishes. Sometimes we sat on the back porch after, and he'd have a beer and I'd have my coffee, and we wouldn't say much at all. One evening he asked me why I hadn't told him immediately, that first night, when I heard her. I told him what I told you, that I needed it to be undeniable, that I needed to give him something he couldn't talk himself out of, because love will talk you out of almost anything if you let it. He nodded for a while. Then he said, "She was right about one thing." I looked at him. "I'm not that smart," he said. "Not about people." "You're exactly as smart as you need to be," I told him. "You just trusted the wrong person. That's not the same thing." He didn't say anything to that, but he stayed on the porch for another hour, which felt like something. I think about Eleanor a lot these days. I think about what she would have done that October night in the utility room. She would have handled it differently, faster, probably, and with considerably less paperwork. Eleanor was never much for waiting, but I think she would have understood why I did it the way I did. There is a kind of love that is loud. It announces itself. It rushes in and breaks things apart in the name of protection. And sometimes that is necessary, and sometimes it leaves more damage than the thing it was trying to stop. And then there is a quieter kind, the kind that watches and waits and makes sure, before it moves, that the ground is solid beneath it. The kind that holds your son's world together with one hand, while the other hand builds the case that will save him. That kind doesn't get celebrated much. It doesn't make a good scene, but it's the kind I had to offer, and I gave it everything I had. Marcus is doing well now. He goes to the gym in the mornings again. He'd stopped during the marriage, I'd noticed, but hadn't said anything. He called me last Tuesday just to talk, no reason, like he used to do before Vivian. We talked for an hour about nothing important. Football. A restaurant he'd tried. Whether I thought the furnace on Sycamore Drive was going to make it through another winter. He laughed twice in that phone call. Real laughing. The kind that doesn't need an audience. If you are a parent listening to this tonight, I want to say something to you directly. You will not always be able to protect your children from the people who want to use them. They will love people you cannot approve of, and they will sometimes love them past the point of reason. And there is nothing you can do to stop that, nor should you try. Love is not something you can legislate out of a person, and you'll lose your relationship with your child faster than anything if you make them feel like they have to choose. But you can watch, you can listen, you can be present in a way that is quiet enough not to threaten and patient enough to be trusted. And if you ever find yourself standing in a utility room doorway, hearing something that turns your blood cold, don't panic, don't rush. Make sure of what you have, and then protect your child with everything you are. My name is Leonard. My son's name is Marcus. His mother was Eleanor, and she would have been so proud of the man he is on the other side of all of this. I kept my promise to her. In the hospital at the end, she took my hand and she said, "Watch over him, not too close, you know how he hates that." And she almost smiled, but close enough. Close enough. That's what I did.